Good afternoon. Um, I'm always driven. Something drives me to share. But sometimes I feel more sense of urgency than other times. And this is such a time. And I want to talk about changes. Life is about change, whether we like it or not. And really, the parameters of our freedom, if you will. Freedom of choice is to simply choose how we react. How do we respond? Is it acceptance? Is it fear? Is it all of the above? And before I get too far into this, I want to show you that I'm decked out. I got my two bracelets on this hand and my chakra bracelets to reinforce the Let's start at the top. This is a green for the heart chakra, about love, self-love today. Yellow is the solar plexus, and the orange is for energy. And on this time, this is for me to left hand, receive, remind. This is about protection, and I just want to envelop everybody in as much protection as I can generate for everyone at this moment. We need protection. And interestingly, it's protection from ourselves, at least self with the little s, the ego that clings and claims us and dominates us, and it's a trickster. It's hollow, it's empty once we recognize. And this kind of ties two things together, choice, and then I want to talk about the precipice. I recently just finished watching a extended series, kind of binge watch, a couple of series a day, about someone going to the abyss. And I'm looking for my cell phone because it's really important that I had a quote from Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, that kind of set this all up. So don't mind me if I look here for a second. Okay, here's this quote. There's a couple quotes, and I'll use one first. If you gaze long enough into the abyss will give... Oh, this is even hard to spit it out. Let's start again. If you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back into you. Wow, the tongue feels thick. Let's see if the silver tongue can persevere. Or at least emerge from... Anyway, I told you today's a tough one for me because I want to set it up with talking about the abyss. I understand now that we need some kind of guide, some kind of teacher to take us to the edge of an abyss. This is what a guru at its best does. This is what anybody, any role model that you have some faith in. It doesn't matter if it's misdirected or warranted. The simple fact is that you have to trust someone. And for me, the only teacher I really had in this lifetime that was alive in a body was somebody I met, is it getting 10 years ago? And he was my teacher for about 5. And I've been out on my own. It was time. But what I want to share with you is that for me, this is the soul that took me to the abyss. Took me to the top, to the edge of the cliff. And I remember thinking that, just as Nietzsche said, the longer I gaze in the abyss, the longer that the abyss gazed back at me. It was a two-way street. And what I want to say now is come to understand, my teacher, even though many of his followers considered him perfect, had some imperfections, like all of us. He's in a human body. So now looking back, a teacher will take you as far as he can, and they took me to the abyss, and he turned his back. I say he, but she, the spirit. And what I want to enhance this for a minute is that you need help. I needed help, and I've come to understand that we all need help to just be simply led to the abyss. And I want to kind of share with you, how I've thought over this. And in my mind at the time, it was my teacher that brought me to the abyss. And what I'm understanding this minute as I'm sitting in front of you, maybe it served me at that time, but it matters not. It could be in the guise of my teacher. It could be that I conjured up and created this and said, this is my teacher that's leading me here. But something led me there. And it needs no name. But at the time, I didn't know what was in store for me. And I remember turning around and watching the spirit, this soul, this expression of the infinite, whatever it may be, walk away without a word. Soundlessly, voicelessly, wordlessly led me to, I just followed like a little puppy. I like that. I like the loyalty of a dog. It's a beautiful thing to behold. And it's pure and it's innocent, and I celebrate that. So this soul, this spirit, this guider, this mentor, this Buddha, this energy, I wordlessly, soundlessly, without question, followed until a few steps from the abyss, as I said, turned heel and walked away without a word. And at that time, I knew that my time with my teacher, his usefulness, he needs to work with someone else. His usefulness for me was at an end, and I had to stand alone, as we all do. So guidance up to, and then the rest is on your own. And this, I was talking about binge watching the show, and they gave this Nietzsche quote. And after watching the whole thing, the end game was that everybody dies in fear. That nobody goes to the precipice. The precipice is symbolic of the end. It's death. It certainly is death of the physical form, to jump into a bottomless, seemingly bottomless pit. And I guess maybe it's not the end, because if you don't hit the bottom. But there was a bottom. But I'm talking about this as a metaphor, this death. And I remember standing on the edge, soaking it all in, but it was the death of fear. The fear was gone. I was no longer afraid, and to this day, and to all the days that I have remaining to me, I'll never be afraid. It's called facing your fear. There it was. The precipice. the abyss staring back. And I just jumped. Without question, without expectation, without even acceptance. And symbolically it was, well, more than symbolically, it was a death. It was the death of the ego. And the next thing that I remember was being a newborn. A naked newborn on a cold, dirty sidewalk. Utterly, completely, totally alone. And with all the skills of any newborn, helplessness, dependency. But the difference was this time is that I learned to depend on the self, myself, the self, ourselves. That which in us is the divinity that is what we're all consisted of. The divinity, the perfection, the light, the love, the harmony, the song. That was what was going to sustain me, to nurture me. It was my surrogate mother, or maybe my mother in the most complete sense of that beautiful, wonderful, inclusive word. The nurturer, the sustainer, the comforter, the teacher. So in the show, they faced the abyss, and the bottom line was that everybody responded to fear. And it was all about the fear of dying. And it's kind of a universal fear, isn't it? It's something unspoken. If you talk about it, people get very uncomfortable. But it's coming for us, one and all. In fact, many times I've understood that from the minute you're born, you're beginning the process of dying. So life to me includes birth and death. Without birth, there's no life. And I understand now, without death, there's no life either. So the fear that people have when they die. I remember saying out loud before I knew better, I intend to die well. And somebody said, why don't you just live well? That's enough. It really touched a nerve. And I understood, in hindsight, this is how I learn. I blurt something out, and then the poor witness, the poor receiver, is just not equipped to handle it. What do I expect, after all? And it wasn't ill-willed of me or with any bad intent. It was just a minute of vulnerability where I was just too open. And I'm learning to guard that vulnerability, to be cautious at all times, to be vigilant, that I don't subject someone that's not quite prepared to hear what I have to say, what I have to share. And today, the last two videos, I'm not wearing my mala, my 108 bead, because when I put the mala on, part of the reason that I wear it for several reasons. One, my wife made it with love and insight and intuition, and from her Buddhahood, made it for me. But it represents the teaching mode. And just the simple visual of it means that I'm offering up something that's learnable, something I thought was appropriate for who's ever in my presence at that moment. This represents, and it doesn't need words. Ultimately, all teaching is wordlessly done. The rest is a preamble, a preparation, a warm-up. That's the talking. But the real message is in Xing, as I learned here, heart to heart, from the teacher's heart to the student's heart, from the mother's heart to the father's heart, to the father's heart to the child's heart. It's a true communication, and it's to be learned from. So I questioned last time, about where's the brain? I would go, here's the brain, but we talk about gut feelings. So in my sacral, or in my solar plexus, actually the left side of the solar plexus, the sacral, the orange, the red is about energy. But from this deep well, I offer my worldless presence. So today, I'm not in the teaching mode. In fact, I'm heavily protected. I showed you already. I'm vulnerable at this moment because something in this show resonated with me, that how easy it is to succumb to fear, and the fear of death. And we're really talking about the ego death, because we have most of us have nothing else, no other idea of who they are or what they are than how their ego defines them. And remember, it's in his ego's best interest to use this last tool as fear. I was reading about the cobra, and when the cobra is up and ready to strike like this, he's in a deep state of fear. This is his last resort to stand up when he doesn't feel like he could run any longer. When we can no longer, we're like the cobra. And the cobra at this time, believe it or not, is when he's most vulnerable, because he sees or feels or understands this is his last resort. So looking over the abyss is our last resort for the survival of the ego. And most people, if they even get as far as the abyss, they're terrified and they step back. And the ego breathes a sigh of relief. And the ego says, you did the right thing. This is about self-survival, which really means this is the ego speaking. I want to survive. I need to live another day to make your life more complex, more confused, and farther away from my own death. But I remember jumping with no second thoughts, because what made this jump possible for me was to see that fear dissipate from my life, to see my fear disappear. My ego had done its best. It was puffed up like a cobra, as threatening as it could be, and I still chose to not be overwhelmed. Actually, it's truly choosing the independence. And independence only means that you're free now to learn who you truly are. And I remember I didn't just tentatively step off. I leapt off the precipice. And I woke up egoless, incredible sense of loneliness, not for 1 second any kind of celebration, no celebration in the death of the ego. I only knew that I knew nothing, that I was helpless, that I was unprotected, that I was on a hard, cold sidewalk with no release, no relief in sight, no Calvary. No one even was aware. It was such a dark, dirty surrounding. And I guess that's the lotus coming from the mud. From the filth and the grime comes some beautiful lotus. And even though at that time I had no idea that it was in full bloom, that beautiful lotus, all I knew is that I came from the mud. So it took time. We've talked about, I came up with the concept of Buddha years, and I have to go back. I think Buddha years is 8 years. I put 6, but I think it's 8 years. 8 years for every year of life. But today, 6 feels more correct. 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times 8 is 48. No, I remember reaching 48 because I was born in 1948. And before I got enamored, before I was connected with 333 and 333 so deeply, it was 48 that resonated with me. So that makes me think 8. 6 years had passed. 6 times 8 should be 48. So let's go with that. And it was my, I made it up anyway. For me, I created it out of, no one told me this, of course. No one's ever spoken of this. I've never heard anyone speak of it before. But survive, I did. I didn't start thriving until middle Buddha age. The young Buddha was like the young Christ, conflicted, still on the journey to understand the import of the I'm looking for a word. Pilgrimage is the word. The import of the pilgrimage that I had embarked on since that first moment of awareness as a baby Buddha. But I knew that whoever I was dead. Whoever I had previously, and I'm saying whoever, I mean the ego me, that famous trickster, was gone. Now I've talked a bit before, not really completely gone because there's this spiritual ego that comes in when you're not mature. Probably after 2 years when I was about 16, and it's a sense of invincibility. It's like a teenager has. Doesn't think that immortal anymore. Immortality. And start to think that I was special somehow, that I was the awoken one, that I was a Buddha, and that this was something different, something special that put me in a different category of most everyone else. And this was a spiritual ego, and this was a tricky one. And it took another full cycle. When I say full cycle, another year, another 8 human years to catch it, to catch myself. And I said, you trickster! I thought you were dead, but you tricked me. You re-emerged as this spiritual. And that's when I learned to embrace ordinariness. That being ordinary is the most extraordinary thing that you can ever experience. Ordinary in the sense that we're all the same. There's no better or worse. There's stages of wakefulness and stages of sleepness, if that's a word. Stages of sleep and stages of awakenedness. And we're all in one of those. We're exactly where we need to be. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. And that's why all that I share, anything that I have to teach, is for those few souls that I resonate with, that I can touch or help in even the smallest way. That's why I look at my YouTube audience. Sometimes no one watches a new video for a few days. My followers are 26. And I'm so pleased. Thank you, those 26 souls. And I don't know if you just followed in a moment of madness, and then if you take the time to watch me talk anymore. But maybe I've served my purpose for you. Hopefully I gave a kernel of the beginning of your own independence, your own acceptance, in the dying process of your ego, and introducing my own experiences with the rebirth after post-egoic state. So today, I'm vulnerable. Today, I'm a student. Today, this is what I can share with you, is that we all experience times of vulnerability, just as we experience times of happiness, times of sadness, times that we feel protected, times that we feel unprotected. We go through these stages. It's a non-stop process. But the fear, the death of the ego and for me, I had to let go of fear in order that the ego could die, as it must. All things die and are born. We can watch universes die, stars die, and they're in their death, in their inward collapse. They send out neutrinos with information, with experience. I think of these YouTube sharings as my neutrinos from a collapsing star. And this collapsing star was my ego. And from this collapse, from this discovery of rebirth, from first surrendering, always come back, no matter what, it comes back to surrendering. And this is a continual effort of surrendering. I surrender to the next breath that's coming. I surrender to the breath that I just exhaled. I surrender to do each day. Because one must remain in a constant state of diligence, awareness, awakeness. Nothing is static. Don't rest on your laurels. And that's why after surrender, say, okay, bring it on, your worst fears. The worst things I'm afraid of, bring it on. This surrender. And then when you see what a hollow shell, if your part, the critical part of you is part of the infinite, the all-knowing, the all-seeing, the all-loving, the all-living, how can there be any room for fear? So surrender your fear. And the biggest one, face your death. That's what the precipice is all about. And sooner or later, you're going to make that leap. Until such time, you're going to be victim of your ego and its devious strategy for its own survival. So you need someone to follow, to show you to the abyss. But it might not be who you visualize. In my case, it probably wasn't my teacher. But it didn't matter, because it represented whatever, maybe the presence, the person, the spirit, the soul, was beyond my understanding. So I personified it, and that's okay. So something or someone has to lead you. And then you're going to be really aware of their absence. They don't wait around till they see what occurs. They might be there if you back down and go, oh, okay. And they might deem you worthy of another chance. But you have to, on your own, without fear, you have to leap into the abyss without knowing consequences, without knowing what's going to happen next.